Good evening, Property Club members. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we have a really great webinar on a topic that should be of significant interest to all sorts of investors in property. We might consider it to be an administrative topic, but in fact, what we'll hear tonight is that this is something that all of us as property investors should ensure that we achieve. This can help manage our cash flow as property investors and minimise our costs down the track. My name is Michael Brooks. I'm a property investor. I look after the Property Club in South Australia, and I'm very pleased tonight to be able to introduce our speaker. Our speaker tonight is Jill Clifford, and from the partnership of Jill and Bevan Clifford. Jill and Bevan have been property investors for almost 25 years, and in that time we've accumulated a property portfolio just over $5 million. In terms of the Property Millionaires Club, which many people on the line will understand, Jill and Bevan are what are called Ruby members. I'm going to cover some quick things before we jump into the presentation. On the GoToWebinar dashboard, which is the information you have on your screen, not the presentation, but just to one side, you can answer questions during the webinar tonight. We will pick some of those questions and answer at the end, but every one of the questions that we receive tonight will receive an answer. So no one's going to be ignored. Similarly, every person on this webinar has got a property mentor within the Property Club. Now, there have been some changes with regard to property mentors, so you might not know who your property mentor is right now, but we will make sure that you are aligned with someone so that you can get the help and support that you need. And on that topic, I'm yet to see another property investment service that offers that. There's probably people on this line that have purchased investment properties 20 plus years ago with the club, that we continue to provide ongoing support and education to. And as you're aware, the cost of tonight is free for you to attend. If you don't receive contact from someone from the Property Club with regard to your attendance tonight, please email the address enquiries@propertyclub.com.au, and then we will have your property mentor contact you. I think that's about all we have for now. So very excited to listen to Jill tonight. Jill has been a tremendous speaker for the club. She's got great information. She talks from the heart and she talks from her own experience as a property investor. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Jill Clifford to start tonight's presentation. Thank you, Jill.
Thanks, Michael. Good evening, everyone. Good to be here again. Perhaps a little bit more of a mundane topic than the last few webinars that I've spoken to, but what records do I need to keep as a property investor? This is actually vital. And one of the things that if you've only bought 1 or 2 properties and you're just starting this journey, you don't realise how important it is to get this right from the start, because otherwise it becomes quite a chore. So the first thing I would say is that you need to treat your properties as a business. And so often we work full-time jobs in other areas. We're buying properties when we get a moment to look at some of the profiles or talk to the researchers or your property mentor, and we try to squeeze it in between everything we do. But as Michael said, for Bevan and I, our portfolio at its peak was over $5 million, and that was worth far more than what we were earning in our jobs, and our income was far more. So we really needed to look at how we were going to keep our records. And in the beginning, I have to say they were pretty scratchy. So look, we're going to look at 3 areas tonight. Firstly, your records management and how to manage them and keep them. Financial management, because that's a big part of a property portfolio, obviously. And then your property management, the people that assist you to manage it. So look, I'm going to start with an annual folder. So for every property you have, you need an annual folder. And you can see there's 3 ways of doing this. Neither's right or wrong. And you'll notice the orange folder up there. Our first property that we bought with the club in, oh goodness me, 1998 was in Clayfield, 5K from Brisbane. And we knew we had to have an annual folder because our property mentor was right on the ball. So we just used a 20-leaf folder like this, and we used to put the details in. If you're more, I suppose, organised, or you might have a filing cabinet and you might have dividers in there, or you might all have this electronically. However, there are times when you're going to need to print some of that information and keep it elsewhere. Let's look at what we need to keep in our annual folder. So this is a separate folder for every property, and at the end of the financial year, you will take these documents out, file them away, we'll use them for your tax return if you don't have them electronically, and go from there. So I deliberately chose our first property. So this is our property at Clayfield, about 5K south of Brisbane. As you would appreciate, 3 times in the 22 years we've owned this property has it been refurbished and repainted. Just been done, so looking pretty good. It's what we call a 6-pack, so there's only 6 units in this, and this was very much the popular property of the time. Down the bottom of the screen you can see is our monthly statement. Now I would ask you, how many of you get your monthly rental statement and read it in detail? I hope the answer would be yes for everyone, but often they get filed away, you're busy, you're opening the mail and doing other things. You really need to check it, and there's a list of the things you need to check. Your weekly rent, because I know over the years the rent for this property is $355 a week, but sometimes there's not the $355 for a week. If sometimes our tenants don't have the cash or pay 4 weeks in advance and then they don't pay. So it's very important that you do read that the weekly rent is coming in and which is the time frame for that rent. Obviously, out of that weekly rent will come your management fee. And as you know, the club says we're roughly about 8% of your weekly rent should be paid in a management fee. Postage and petties, which almost seems ridiculous these days, they still stayed around $5.50 in just about every one of our properties. And these days we get all our monthly rental statements by email, not by post. But you'll see later on, when we first started this journey, we didn't have electronic files. The other thing is repairs and maintenance. If there's been a repair or money spent in that month, then that should be on your monthly rental statement. And there should also be a separate invoice for that so that you can file it away. The other thing is your inspection reports. So as we always say, ideally 3 inspections a year. I think these days we don't get as many inspection reports, but they're a real guide to what is likely to need to be done in terms of repair and maintenance for your property in the future, because it will start to indicate that maybe cords are broken on your blinds, or maybe there's some marks on the wall. So you do need to keep track of that. You need to read them and file away for the annual report, and also the smoke alarm report. That's pretty important. I would think most people with your managing agent today have an automatic annual smoke alarm check. If you haven't, I suggest you contact your property manager and discuss that with them. We pay an annual fee and we know that that is checked every year. So they're the sort of things to do with your monthly rental statement that need to be in this annual folder. The other thing is rates notices, and usually there's 2 rates notices, council and water. And with both of these, they usually come around about the same time, and most of them are quarterly or 4 monthly. And in some states, now these obviously is a Queensland property, in some states, in WA and in our Northern Territory property, they have different ratios. So you can either pay a year's rate up front for your council, certainly not for your water because it's based on usage, but with your council rates, or they can be paid quarterly. And certainly in Queensland, there's no extra fee to pay them quarterly. I know in WA, our property there, we pay extra to pay quarterly with our rates, so we tend to pay them annually. Purely up to you, but certainly you need to keep track here. Are the tenants using the same amount of water? Remember, if you're individually metered, then the tenants can pay a percentage of the water, but in a lot of apartment buildings, there's not individual meters, and therefore it's averaged out for the tenants that are in, or I should say the units that are in that complex. So that's council and water rates. They should be in your annual. And then of course, if it's a unit or apartment or a townhouse, then you've probably got a body corporate or a strata. If it's a house and land and it's freestanding, then you won't have a body corporate notice. But there's two aspects of here. Most of our body corporates are paid every 4 months. And you'll see that here there's two funds. The administration fund, which pays the body corporate company. In this instance, Yule Strata, our body corporate managers. And there's also a sinking fund. Now, a sinking fund is a build-up of money for future repairs that may be required. Remember, you're responsible for repairs inside your unit and maintenance, but the body corporate, depending what plan you're on, and that's a topic for another time, is there's a sinking fund. And that's the money that builds up, maybe to replace gutters, to do some landscaping over the time. So that needs to be in your annual folder. And then there's your insurance and the land valuation. Insurance, we pay annually. You may be able to pay it monthly, but with several companies, it costs extra to pay monthly. But you'll notice for a year, rent cover, this one's still with EBM, you will notice that we pay $280, which is really quite cheap. But when you have 13 properties with one company, they'll always give you a reduction. So that's a renewal notice for a year. Just one thing to remind you that our last topic that I spoke on was if you were selling a property, that when you do sell a property, then if you've paid a yearly fee for your insurance, you can claim that back. The other thing that some of you may or may not be familiar with is the annual land valuation notice. This is usually done every 2 years, and we would always anticipate that they'll go up, but I have to tell you that is not always the case. Sometimes they go down. Happy to say that this one in between the year 16-17 financial year, the value of the site was $740,000, and 2 years later the value was $830,000. So it had gone up nearly $100,000. There's only 6 units on this valuation, so it gave us an understanding of how the valuation of this property. Remember, we're only talking land valuation here, but that usually comes out every 2 years. So they're all of the items that should be in this annual folder. As I showed you, we keep them just in a manual folder, and then at the end of the year, pull them all out, file them away for our tax return. The second area we're going to look at tonight was financial management. And this is key in terms of you originally bought property as a financial investment, so you need to keep track of that. You really need to know the position of each property, and you need to know your portfolio cash flow. And if you do understand those things, then you'll know your overall asset position. And I'm going to look at some spreadsheets in a moment, but one that the club provides is this property management program. And I would think or hope that by far the majority, at least 90% of you listening tonight, would have this program. I believe it's one of the best programs that the club has produced. If you don't have a copy of this program, then you need to ask your PM, or in the question box, say that you would like a copy sent, and we'll make sure that you get a copy. But you'll see on that list of expenses, it goes from 3 down to 27 different items that you can keep track of. Over on the green section, you've got your rental income and any other income, because pretty well, unless you've got an insurance claim, the only income from your property will be your rent. Okay, so going further into that property management program, you'll see where the details are. You can put each property, what it is, and then the rental income, and then the list of all of these. Now, this gives you an overall snapshot, I suppose, if you like, of your property. You will need to have other material in terms of record keeping apart from this, but it gives you an overall look at your total portfolio. You notice in the one I've got up here, there's only 5 properties. When you first open the program, you can have it show for as many properties as you want to. So if you look at some of them, legal expenses, sometimes we forget about them, particularly with this property that we have now that we've owned for over 22 years, then there were legal expenses when we first purchased it, which need to be recorded, because at the time when you might sell this property, then there are expenses there that you can claim. Travel and car expenses. Now, obviously, some of these have changed with the change in ATO regulations in what you can claim, but that doesn't mean if you're going to a conference, for example, you can certainly claim travel in that case. So that's an electronic program for an overall snapshot of your properties. Now, certainly you need to keep track of your finance structure management. And I keep going back, I deliberately chose Clayfield tonight as the property because we've held it for 22 years. And so we still need that initial setup cost. So originally we borrowed the money, like most of you, we set up a line of credit against our home. In other words, we used the equity in our home to set up a line of credit, and that line of credit we used for the deposit for the purchase of the property. So we still need to retain those records. We then had an initial investment for that loan, and I know this is something for another time, but when you are looking to buy a property, on your loan document for that property, the only address of the property should be the property you're buying. I think some of you have heard me say before, in our first 3 properties that we bought, we queried to each other, Bevan and I, why was our home here in Loxton, because we live in country South Australia, why was the address of our home and the property we're buying on the loan documents? It was because they had cross-collateralized us. Now, if you don't know what that is, you certainly need to talk to your property mentor and your broker. Not the best option. When you're buying a property, the only address that appears on those loan documents should be the address of the property you're purchasing. So make sure you check that out with your broker. Then obviously we moved on and had multiple investment loans, because as you build a property portfolio, as our Clayfield property grew, we took the equity out of that for a deposit on a property, another property, I should say. Now, once you have multiple properties and you are taking money from one property for a deposit for another one, it doesn't mean you're crossing the property. It just means that you've now got 2 loans against that one property. So it's certainly important that you have these loan documents relevant. And that comes to the consolidation of the loans, which is just what I've talked about. Then, of course, the harvest structure. When you start harvesting money from these properties, that money is for personal use generally and isn't tax deductible. So you need to have records to show where that money has gone for future. And so I'm just going to bring up some details now of a portfolio financial position. Now, this is ours, and I've put some of our properties up there for you to have a look at, not so much to look at the properties, but to look at the headings to give you some idea. Now, this is a spreadsheet that I personally got from an ex-branch manager, Anne Greening, over in Melbourne, because I went to a conference and we got chatting about how do you best keep your records. Some of you may have other programs for this, but this is how we keep track of our personal expenses. So firstly, over here on the left, we have the address of our properties. I've taken out the actual address because you don't need to know that, but I've put the suburbs in which the properties are in. Then we've got the ownership, because loan documents are very important. because usually a loan document is done 50-50 if you buy it between you, but ownership of the property is quite different. And you'll notice here that Bevan and I have several at 90-10. They're not all 50-50. So that's going to be significant when it comes to selling your property. The other thing is the market value of the property. And obviously I keep this monthly and I keep changing it. This is an old one, so the property values have changed on these properties. But then I have a column for the weekly rent. So we know that, and because this is an Excel spreadsheet, it'll calculate our total rent at the end. Then we have the monthly rent across the top here at the top. Then we've got the debt. So that's the debt currently against that particular property. The loan to value ratio, and I'm thinking some of you will look at that and think, gee, some of those loan to value ratios are high. If you look down at this one here, it's 55%. Now, that's not to do necessarily with the growth of the properties, but we have got our LVRs down and then we've taken equity back out, whether it's to purchase another property or for our lifestyle, which has taken the LVR up on those properties. And once again, you need to know where you are with those properties, because when you go to the lender and you want to try and negotiate a better interest rate, often they will only negotiate, particularly NAB, if the LVR on your property is below 80%. And in our opinion, and remember I'm speaking from our experience, you would never want to renegotiate a loan with a bank and go back into LMI territory. We believe that once you're under 80%, you really need to try and stay there. You'll notice then we've got the lender, because that's pretty important. I usually have another column in here with the, well, actually in this lender, I have the lender detail, the loan number against here. I've removed that just for privacy, but you'll notice that we have several major lenders and several minor lenders. And I'm sure some of you have different, many different lenders, and we need to know our financial position because you're always negotiating with different banks. With the interest rate, you need to know your interest rate and to be able to access it really quickly, because often when we've managed to get our interest rates down, it's because we said that we have loans or are able to negotiate a loan with a different lender at a lower rate. And so if you've got this on a spreadsheet, you're just going to be able to look that up instead of having to go through all those actual documents to find what it is. Over here is our monthly repayment for the loans. And this is particularly interested in the next one, is that some of them have, of course, gone to P&I. And I know you've all been challenged with that over the last few years if you've held property for a long time. But this is a spreadsheet that I update from month to month. This last column I think is very important. It's your loan review date. So this is the dates here where you can see in 21, that's the end of our interest only period. 23, 25, the end of our interest only period. Now in the current climate, more than 5 years interest only, you tend to have to go back and renegotiate. So we were in the period where we could get 10 years interest only. Now, whether that'll come back, that's something for another discussion. But if you're interested in a spreadsheet like this, I'm more than happy to send it to you, and then you can add more columns or delete. I actually have a few more columns, but I thought for tonight, this was relevant. But so that's the one way of keeping your portfolio financial position. It's very simple. It's an Excel spreadsheet and it's calculating. So we've talked about the annual folder. We've talked about our financial position. Now it's a perpetual folder. This is, as perpetual means, this is forever. And I have to say, 2 years ago when we sold our first property, our accountant, who is a very property savvy accountant, said, Jill, I need some details from you about when you purchased this property. And we were taught by our property mentor that we needed to keep this folder. So we have this for every property that we've ever owned. Because not even when you've sold your property, you need to keep those records. But my understanding is 5 years. Double check that with your accountant. So the first thing we have in this is the profile of the property. And if you've got a property club property, you will have a profile. Today, our profiles aren't as detailed as they used to be, but you always get some information from the researcher about this property with floor plans in it, with rental calculations. You need to have all of that in the profile to keep. We found that invaluable when we were looking to sell. You need to have a copy of the contract in here, and it needs to be signed. If those of you who listened to our last webinar, when they're calculating date of sale from date of purchase, then it's the date you sign this contract. So not when it's settled, but the date you sign the contract. So it's very important you have that, because that's part of the calculations for capital gains. So the second one is that when you bought this contract, there were solicitor costs when you settled. They had to do searches, there were costs for them, and those are claimable. Some of those are claimable back when you sell. So you need to have those original documents in that perpetual folder. A copy of your building and strata plans, that might be significant, and you often need to get that from your strata to begin with. And you should have had those when you bought the property. So you need to keep them because they're perpetual. You have a letting agreement with either your managing agent or your on-site manager. And you'll see in a later slide I bring up, we were very keen on on-site managers because they live in the complex and they're able to keep on top of things. But they sign an agreement, often with on-site managers, it's 25 years. Letting agreement, not quite as long, but you need a copy of that, because if there's any challenges to what their duties are, you will have that copy that you can go back and look at. It's really important. You should have a copy of your tenancy agreement. Now, because a tenancy might be there for more than a year, I believe this needs to be in your perpetual folder, and you can keep changing that over as you get a new tenant. You might have a copy in your annual, but you certainly need to have the current one in here, because you'll notice I've just made a note there that if you have an insurance claim, you need proof of tenancy. You can get that from your on-site manager, but how much better to have a copy yourself. You need a copy of your loan agreement in there, because that's going to be significant down the track when you look to sell this property or pass it on. Valuations. We believe it's very important to have valuations kept in a perpetual folder because they change so much. And I spoke last week that your property mentor has the capacity to get you an RP data valuation, and today is from today. And so we like to keep them so we can compare them. Your depreciation report, that's a 40-year report, as you know. We used to send it into our accountant each year, but once they've taken it the first year you're putting in a tax return for that particular property, they will take a copy. So you can keep that permanent depreciation report in your perpetual folder. Termite inspection and installation. We just said before that each year you should have this done, but I think it's something that needs to go into the perpetual folder too, of proof certainly that you've had the inspection, but also you might have had, if you've got a freestanding home, you might have had termite installations put in around that home, and you need to keep that recorded because that should last you for a long, well, the time you keep that property. Your latest insurance policy. Once again, it's easier if it's in the perpetual. I would have that in both my folders, I actually do. Appliance and repairs. And this is something that has caused us a little bit of grief over the years. When you buy a new property, there are always guarantees on the stove, on the hot plates, on your hot water service, and often they are thrown in the drawer of your apartment because your tenant might want them. However, we, in the last few years, have always asked our managing agent to take a photocopy of those guarantees, so we've got them in the perpetual folder. As they wear out, you can remove them, but you certainly need to get that in case you need repairs. And as always, I mention air conditioners, so you need to have the guarantee of those. Now, I've moved on because this is not what I would call the most professional cupboard in the world, but for Bevan and I, this works. So those blue folders are our perpetual folders. You'll notice they're quite big because they've actually, if I go back a slide, which I will, that has a copy of all of those items in those blue folders. So that if I need something, I can just take them out. The red folders are smaller, they're only a 20 leaf folder. I deliberately made them orange so that when I first started and I only had one, I'd be able to find it in my drawer. And we've labeled those. So the orange ones are the ones we keep annually. The blue ones are for the perpetual. Now you might like to have a filing cabinet. I know when I first heard Wendy Priestley talk about keeping records years ago, she used a filing cabinet because she had a huge portfolio. But for us, this works. Maybe because we're older, a lot of this information we have in electronic files, but then you need to make sure you have backup. And because we have a bookkeeper who comes in once a month and keeps track of all our business on the Maya program we choose to use, we physically need to make a note on some of those files for her to keep track of. So that's our filing cabinet there. The other thing I believe you need to keep a record of is your lease timetable and contacts. Once again, this is just a spreadsheet which I print and I have taped to the inside of that door you just looked at previously. So if I need to ring someone, I've got easy access. So you can see, first of all, we have the property, what property it is, what the managing agent is, whether they're on-site manager or the company that manages it, the actual person and their phone number for quick reference. Some of you these days, I'm thinking, might keep that in your phone, so you've always got it with you. Their email address, and remember to change them because we often have changes of managing agent. Here, this is an old copy that I've got here, but you'll notice I put in green when the lease is there, and actually when they've expired, I actually change them. And you'll notice this one is the first property that we've sold, so I've changed that to red, but I like to keep it there. Today's timetable and list of contacts would not have those properties in it that we've sold. Then our body corporate contact person, and I just want to throw in here for your benefit, remember the body corporate is you. And we employ a manager, and that's what these people are, the managers of our body corporate, but the committee is you, and you instruct them. So you really should be involved with your body corporate, a discussion for another time, I think. Electronic management tools, once again, you'll notice up here at the top, this is Clayfield. It was only in 06 and 07 that our managers started sending us things electronically. So before that, we had to keep paper files. You'll notice over here in this folder, so if I went to the 2021 folder, I would have all of this, exactly what I started with tonight, in electronic form. So it's purely up to you what you feel most comfortable with. But I can't stress enough that the people who have only got 1 or 2 properties, if you get this record keeping correct at the start, then you will find it so much easier than if you wait a few years like we did and then had to go back and look up all this information. So hopefully tonight that's given you a better understanding of what records to keep, annual and perpetual, and just a few other little records that will help you along the way. And that's it for me. And now I'm going to hand back to Michael, see if we have any general questions that need answering. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. That's a tremendous amount of information that you provided, and thank you very much. And I also really appreciate the way that you're candidly sharing your own information. I would again put the point out there that that's one of the things that I personally love about the Property Club, that people are open and honest about their own affairs and happy to be asked questions. We have had a range of questions come through. I've been answering quite a number of them as they've come through. I just might ask you this one though, Jill. So the question was, if you've had your investment property for a while, does the loan agreement in the perpetual folder need to include all of the loans or only the current loan that you have over that property?
I would say the current loan, Michael. I have another filing cabinet full of original loans, but because those loans have changed, they've changed lenders. Some of those, I think we have very few loans with original lenders. I think Westpac we do have. So the latest loan documents is the one you need.
Yeah.
But the others I think should be filed away.
And there was another comment, another question, Jill, that you might be able to comment on in broad terms, which was about, you know, as we move to keeping soft or electronic copies of things, you know, do we retain a paper version?
Well, I believe we do, because unless you have set up, which we have only in the last couple of years, an electronic signature, you will actually need the paper copies that have been signed, and possibly there's a chance, I'm thinking, that some of those original, whether it's a letting agreement with an on-site manager or a loan document, there wasn't electronic signatures then, so you would need to keep the paper copy. That's just my thinking.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things that I've learned is that if you choose to keep documents electronically, then you need to have some very good backup protocols from your own PC onto some sort of external hard drive. We had this issue, you know, personally, where we lost a lot of photos and private information when the hard drive of our computer died, and we didn't have it backed up anywhere. So I think that's a really important point as well, that it should be backed up. Electronic copy should be backed up to a source that is kept completely separate to your PC. I am getting more questions in, and there's probably just one or potentially two that I'll ask before we wrap up the session tonight. So some questions around, Jill, is it necessary to keep copies of body corporate meetings for each of your properties?
I have to say no, but I'm not sure that's a good answer, Michael.
Yeah. Yeah.
We read them and we file them away, and then look, you could be in a paper war, because a lot of ours come by paper. We obviously go online to body corporate meetings as well, and I think that you would always be able to access them through your body corporate if you needed. I would think if you've got issues in your body corporate, then I would certainly be wanting to keep the minutes of those. But I'm thinking lots of people, if you're not on your body corporate, we often get sheets from our body corporate about saying for information only. And I must say, we don't keep all of those.
Yeah, fantastic. Jill, I must tell you that there has been a significant number of positive feedback items submitted about your presentation tonight. So you're preaching to an audience who are seeking that sort of information. So to you, I say a big well done. People have taken the questions box as an opportunity to provide some feedback, which is fantastic. And we do really appreciate people coming along tonight. Just a reminder, there is a document in the handout section that Jill has discussed, which is her record keeping approach. So you can immediately access that yourself under the listing on the GoToWebinar dashboard. There's a heading that says handouts, and if you click down on that, you'll find a Word document called record keeping. I just want to finish with some final comments again to thank Jill. There's a lot going on in the Property Club at the moment, and your branch managers in each of the states are working really hard to find ways to conduct events and engage with you as members during the challenging time that we're in. For Property Club SA members, we've got a function coming up that's yet to be advertised at the end of November, which is a large-scale event, and we're hoping that we can have a lot of people attend that. Details will follow shortly. We're open to any topics that you would like to hear about via these webinars. This was initially planned as a PMC, or a Property Millionaires Club webinar, but we thought that the topic was likely to be of interest to all property investors, whether they are first-time investors or they're purchasing their 10th property or anything in between. So topics can come either to inquiries@propertyclub.com.au, or they can come directly to myself or Jill, or via the questions box tonight. We'll capture them from there. You can expect that someone from the Property Club will make contact with you within the next couple of days, just to see if you have any questions or if we can help you further, and to reaffirm that we're a property investment service that continues to provide support to our members long after they purchase the properties. So on that note, I'm going to say again, thanks to Jill, and I'm going to wish everyone who's attended a good night, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you.